Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection and a sense of belonging, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about sensitivity and the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. We are going into the week of Hanukkah, which has already started. Christmas will be in a few days. If there are other things that you celebrate that I haven't mentioned, forgive me, I'm trying to be inclusive. This episode is really about expectations and disappointments, which I think is really relevant for this time of the year. It can be really overwhelming, overstimulating, over-arousing. And I'm seeing where this is showing up not only with the holidays, but also in relationships. So I want to take some time and give you some ideas. To be honest with you, there's not really a way to do this and come up with if you're struggling with this and this is what you need to do, because there are so many different ways that this can show up for us. But I'm going to give you some specific examples. As is typical for an HSP, I've been reflecting a lot. That's what we do, and we're really good at it. That's Gracie. I didn't close the door. I didn't take her collar off before I started recording. She was on my lap and she wanted to get down. So you may hear some Gracie noises. I've really been thinking about relationships a lot this year. And one of the things I've really been practicing this year is working on my expectations around relationships. The reality is we're going to have expectations, we're going to have disappointments, but I've really worked on trying to allow people to show up however it is that they show up and to really be okay with it. And for the most part, this has been really successful. In reflecting over a number of podcast episodes that I've done, I actually regret in some ways talking about some of the relationship challenges that I was having. It's how I process. I still do it to a certain extent. That may change in the future, but as I've been reflecting over some of the bumps that I've had in relationships, I don't know that I would have drawn a firm line about ending a relationship because it wasn't working. What I think I would have liked to have done differently is to just give it some space. And I know that for a number of the long-term relationships that I've had, we just naturally go through periods where we've got more space in the relationship. Then we kind of come back together. If it works, we stay connected. There's just this natural rhythm that seems to happen. And I feel like due to my talking about the importance of naming things, and I don't go back on the fact that I think it is important to name things as I'm growing as a person, how I show up in the world changes, what I talk to you about changes, and I just have to trust that I'm going to share with you where I'm at in my process. And as you grow and change, you may also choose to do things differently. And just because I'm saying that this is how I'm doing it doesn't necessarily mean that this is how you're going to choose to do things. But I think if I could go back, I may not have drawn a line in the sand about relationships not working for me, certain relationships. I don't know. That's just how I'm feeling about it. And the few episodes that I did where I wasn't invited and it hurt my feelings, I made a statement like, I don't know if I would really want to go if I were invited again. Like, I regret saying that. And although I didn't feel like I was feeling hurt in the moment, I think that came from a place of trying to feel okay about what was going on. And I feel like I kind of nailed my coffin, or whatever that idiom is. I put a nail in my own coffin because I'm sure no one's going to want to invite me to any gatherings now. And I would like to have the option of going or not going. I'm just sharing what I'm thinking in retrospect about how I've handled things this year. And given the skill set that I had at the time, I made the best choices that I can, and I'm not going to go back and play coulda, woulda, shoulda. I'm not beating myself up over it. I'm just saying, gosh, in retrospect, I may have done things differently. There's something interesting that happened recently in a relationship. And again, I want to be really clear. This is about me. This is not about the other person. Nobody did anything wrong. I tend to pick people that show up in the world very differently than I do. At the extreme, I like to be organized and structured. I like plans. That kind of works for me. And I tend to be drawn to people that are spontaneous and I think in some ways can be much more fun than I am. It also means that there's not that level of, I can be pretty committed about how I show up in remembering things, and people that tend to be much more fun and spontaneous, that's not always their skill set. And I want to be really clear, like I don't always show up this way in the world, that I forget things, I lose things, I cancel things. So I'm not trying to draw a delineation. I'm just trying to paint a little bit of a picture. So this is kind of a habit that I have. And I seem to be okay with allowing lots of room and grace for how people show up. But recently something happened and all of a sudden I was feeling frustrated about something. And the best analogy that I can give you, because I do want to maintain privacy about this. There was a period in my life where I wanted my husband to do something for me, but I didn't want to ask. Like, if I have to ask, then it doesn't count. And so I end up suffering. He ends up suffering because chances are he'd want to do what it is that I want, but I'm not willing to say it because then in my mind, it doesn't count. That comes from a young place, a wounded place, a place that's not feeling seen and heard. And so this dynamic showed up for me in a relationship. Again, with the perspective that I have now, I don't know that I would have said anything. What I may have said is, hey, I know we talked about doing this thing and I'd still really like to do it. It's feeling important to me. I probably would have left it at that. I processed it a little bit more deeply. I'm okay that I processed it. But again, I'm just starting to see that there are times when I need to process things with the person. There are times when I need to process it somewhere else. And there are times when I just need to let it go. This is the part where I'm saying I can't really give you a clear, definitive answer of when you need to do one or the other. I think the best thing I can tell you is notice what you're doing and is it working? If you're processing with someone, are you feeling seen and heard? Is it easing the burden or is it making you feel like you're digging in even more? Are you not feeling like the person is getting you? I think there are certain relationships where we tend to default to the same types of challenges, and it doesn't matter what the content is. We seem to end up in these same places. I know in my marriage, there are certain things that we just don't resolve, but we talk about it, and talking about it really helps and it eases what's going on. We name it. In other relationships, it doesn't really work to process things deeply because we have this place where we lock horns, or that's kind of a strong way of saying it. We get this place where maybe I'm not feeling seen and heard and it triggers something for the other person and we just don't go somewhere positive. So back to the example at hand. If the example were, I'm wanting my husband to bring me flowers, I feel like I don't want to tell him, it doesn't count. You know what? I need to bring me flowers. I mean, I have two choices. I can tell him, hey, I'm really wanting flowers. Would you be willing to bring them to me? There's nothing wrong with that. In this specific situation that I'm being vague about, what I realized is I let the person know what it was that I was wanting. And then I realized, like, I really need to be here for me. If we're talking about flowers, I went out and bought myself some flowers. Part of what I'm recognizing, and I hate that this goes on. I hate talking about it. I totally accept it. As a child, I've done amazing healing work with my mom. My mom lives with us. This is coming out a few days before her birthday. Happy birthday, Mom. I love you so much. And this comes up a lot, that my mom was a single parent. She was very stressed. She really wasn't able to be as present for me emotionally as she would have been in retrospect and as much as I needed. And so I have this wound of feeling like I'm being too much and really wanting that nurturing mothering from someone. If I look back over many of my relationships with women, I've tried to recreate relationships where women are really nurturing to me. There's nothing wrong with that. And in one of my more recent relationships, I just got a chance to see, like, I did it again, where I'm really looking externally for lots of validation and to know that I'm okay. And we need that sense of interdependence. I want to be very clear that we're wired for connection. We're supposed to have needs. We're supposed to be connected to people. It's okay to want things. It's okay to need things. I really want to be very clear that there, in no way am I saying we shouldn't need anybody. We should meet all of our own needs. But what I saw happen in this dynamic in this relationship was I was expecting this person to show up in a certain way. And in many ways they do. And in this one area, they weren't. And it really tripped me up. And I spent a weekend in some pain because it really triggered this wounding for me. So it's not about the person, it's about my history of how I felt like I just wasn't lovable the way that I showed up. And so I've got to do all this stuff to be lovable. And because this wounding got triggered, no matter what I do, I feel like I'm just not lovable. I'm not enough. I'm too much. I can't get my needs met. There's a whole thing for me that comes up around identifying what I want, verbalizing it. And then if I don't get it, there's like a really young rage that comes up. I don't rage at anybody, but as I'm talking to a number of other therapists that I'm close to, everybody's going like, yeah, I got that too. I want to name it to break the shame around it because I think on some levels, there's a part of us that feels like at some point we're just going to lose it and go crazy on people because these really young parts of us that weren't seen and heard, and we don't know how to attend to them. What occurred to me is I saw like, oh my gosh, I did it again. Like I'm looking to this relationship to meet my needs and to make me feel valid and valued and feel good. I realized like I really need to work even more on showing up for myself and those parts of me that feel hurt and angry and not seen. I need to be there for me. We don't get this very much. Our society, our culture is so externally focused. If we're going to get the healing that we need, the eventual step is we need to learn to be here for ourselves. Now, it's very possible that part of that process is we need to trust other people. We need to hear it from other people. We need to see it modeled before we can learn to be here for ourselves. And it's not an either or, and it's not you have to do A, B, C, and D, and then you get to this step. This is the part where I feel like it's messy, it's unclear. But my hope is that in talking about this, some of this will resonate with you and you'll go like, oh, yeah, I see that. I got that. This is what I need to do. This is where I'm at. This is in no way meant for you to beat up on yourself. I'm going to repeat that. This is in no way meant for you to beat up on yourself. This is about having a greater understanding of some of the dynamics that we may be doing in our relationship. Lots of them. Healing, wounding. It's not like we get it right and then it's done and we don't do it anymore. If we're going to be alive, things are going to come up. We're going to have uncomfortable feelings. We're going to be able to sit with them. We're going to have moments of joy. I keep seeing things that are like, do this thing and you won't have anxiety. Do this thing and you won't have depression. If you're alive and you're a feeling person, you're going to have feelings. That's just the reality of it. And what happened when I identified that I had this expectation that this person was going to show up in a certain way. And I realized like, I did it again. Like I'm wanting that perfect mother that's going to love me unconditionally so that I feel okay. They're going to reflect that back to me. And I felt some anger. I felt some grief because it's like thinking that there was something outside of me that was going to heal me, make me feel better, soothe me. It's got to come from within. Again, we can get that from the outside, but what happens is when we count on it and we don't get it and we get disappointed and frustrated, and part of that is human. People are not going to be able to meet all of our needs. But in this way that I experienced it, it's like, it's got to come from me. I have to be the one that's going to really show up and be there for me. So when we talk about the power of the and of being able to hold two things at the same time, I spent some time over the weekend holding the grief, the loss, that feeling that like I was going to be able to get this thing from somebody on the outside, and the comfort that once I moved through this grief, disappointment, frustration, anger, I'm here for me and I will always be here for me and I can always count on me. And I'm not getting rid of the relationship. This is the other part of it, that what I was able to recognize is there are a number of ways where this relationship really, really works for me. And there's some areas where there's some things that I don't get my needs met. It's not a bad thing. And I'm not going to throw in the relationship. I'm not going to talk about it with this person. I just know that this is an area where I want to go somewhere else to get my needs met, or I need to take care of myself. Or this is an area where I may get my needs met some of the time, but not all of the time. And I think one of the challenges that's really difficult for us as highly sensitive people is We may notice dynamics in relationships. We may notice limitations. We may notice patterns in ourselves and in others and in the relationship that the other person doesn't see. Sometimes we need to talk about it in the relationship. Sometimes maturity is about knowing that we're seeing something and it's really not the kindest thing to share it with someone, that we just get to know, like, okay, this is how this person shows up, and I'm going to find a way to love and accept how they show up. And if I have to have workarounds, then I'm going to figure out what my workarounds are. That can look a number of ways. If somebody has a limitation, or they're late, or they forget things, or they're not able to be super empathic in certain areas, or there are all kinds of examples. And as I've said a million times, I really suck at coming up with examples. So what I would want the takeaway to be is to just have more awareness about how are we showing up in relationships? What are we expecting from our partners, our bosses, our employees, our coworkers, our parents, our children? Is it giving us peace? Are we having peace? Relationships are hard and messy, so I'm not talking about having the perfect relationships, but if there are things that are coming up and they come up consistently where we get thrown, or we get wounded, or we go into that young place, or our attachment or abandonment issues are coming up, chances are there's something that needs to be looked at. Do you have the support, and can you figure out what it is that you're needing or where you're getting hung up? In the same respect, I would feel really upset if somebody had an agenda for me about how they wanted me to show up in the world. If there's something that I'm doing in a relationship and I can change it and it creates more intimacy, I'm open to looking at that. It's really easy for us to have ideas of what we think would be better for someone. If you just went to therapy, if you changed your diet, if you just exercised more, if you were a little bit more organized, whatever those things are. There may be people that look at my life and think if I just did these things that I'd have more ease. But it's really up to the individual to have that pain point. And when it becomes important enough for me to make those changes, I will. But for me to decide what somebody else needs in their life, or for somebody else to decide what they think I need, it can be really disrespectful and very unhonoring. It can be hard because I may see something that I think somebody would have so much more ease if they just did what I told them to, but that may not be what they want to do. And so finding that way that we can really have respect and honor where people are at. And often people will come and tell us what they're struggling with, and we want to go into a fixing mode. Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not. And sometimes it's about just being with someone and allowing them to have that experience of where they're at, and just to say, like, how is that for you? That sounds really frustrating. That sounds lonely. That sounds disappointing. That we can hold space for people and be there for them. But it's this whole idea around the expectations and disappointments that can really throw us off. I've talked about this before. I don't know that there will ever be a time when I don't have expectations. When I'm aware of them, I can go, oh, that was an expectation. It often comes up when I'm like, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm disappointed, I didn't get what I wanted. Then I'm like, I had an expectation. What I would suggest is really to use radical self-compassion, mindfulness, being curious, just noticing what's coming up. And if you're getting hung up and stuck and pulled, very strong reactions, responses, things that stay with you and they don't end up dissipating, we're human. We're going to have feelings. So I'm not talking about living a peaceful kumbaya namaste life, especially over the holidays, but it's seeing where we get stuck and we get pulled in because it creates suffering for us. We don't want to suffer. The people around us don't want to suffer. We're not our best selves when we're suffering. So what do we need to do to work through it? And I really believe that if you work with people, you have either good support, a good therapist, a good coach, we can learn to work through these things. We can really increase our ability to sit with discomfort, to know that what we're going through is not the truth of who we are. It may be uncomfortable. It may not be what we're choosing for today, but I think that there's a way that we can learn to work through it where it doesn't throw us off of our game and we don't lose a sense of who we are and we don't go into that total hopelessness. And if that's where you're at, it's okay. There's no judgment there. My hope is that you're getting good support around it. we need to start where we need to start. And there are times when I wonder, I've been working on this stuff for a long time. I may not be as sensitive to where people are at. People may be in a place where they're just needing to be heard right now, and they're not ready to make some of the other changes that I talk about. And so if it's not connecting with you, or I'm talking about skills that you're just not there yet, I don't know how to bridge that gap. I really do my best to be mindful about being kind and conscientious to where everybody's at, but I'm really not able to do that. The best thing I can say is wherever you're at is perfect. To use self-compassion, mindfulness to really be okay. And if you need to get support, or if you've got friends or people you can reach out to, because we are going to think about things deeply. We're going to process things deeply. We're going to be impacted by things more than the non-HSPs. But I really do think that there are ways to manage. So going into this week with the holidays, regardless of what you celebrate, I know this can be a really challenging time for some people. It's about disappointment and loss of family, relationships, finances. Some people love the holidays. For some people, it's a mixed bag. What is it that you're needing to take care of yourself? What would be honoring and nurturing to you? Is there a way that you can get some of that? Is there a way you can get more of that? If it means turning on a favorite song in your car and just really listening to that song for one song, if there's a podcast that you listen to, if there's a movie, if there's taking a bath or a walk or looking out a window or spending time with a child or not spending time with a child, if you're a mom having a few minutes in the bathroom alone, spending time with an animal. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that we can try and get just a little slice of comfort. If it means curling up with a cozy blanket or a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or cocoa or chicken broth or, whatever it is that's going to bring you some comfort. Are there ways that you can get really small self-care breaks, even if it means just going into the bathroom, whether you're at work or at home, and doing a couple of deep breathing exercises or using breath work? You can do box breathing where you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. I mean, there are lots of ways that we can bring in little pieces of mindfulness and self-comfort because it's a really, really busy time of year. And if you're in a place where everything sucks, notice what sucks. Make a list of the things that suck, because it gives you an idea of what's not working, and maybe we can find some ways to make those things work a little bit better in the future or next year. Sometimes things just suck, and that's the way that it is. And so, again, trying to find some way of having a little bit of comfort or support or ease around it, lighting a candle, or I'm just trying to come up with things that are simple and easy to do that can just give us a little bit of comfort and peace. What I really love to do at the end of the year is to sit down and write about what has the year been like. I try and look at it professionally, personally, financially, relationships, friends, spirituality, just reflecting on the year. And then I love to write about what is it that I want to create more of in the following year. And I decided that for this next year, I really want to work on seeing myself through my own lens. And what I mean by that is it's so easy for me. Like today I was communicating with my son via Marco Polo, and I started to say something and I said, I know what you're thinking. And I was looking through the lens of my son looking at me as a mom. And it diminished what I was saying because what I have to say is my perspective and I believe it. A friend of mine was really kind enough to reflect to me. I was saying the other day, like, I have a really busy day. Compared to you, it's not that busy because we do our lives very differently. And she reflected back to me, what would it be like to honor that a busy day for you is a busy day for you? So this is that place where our mirror neurons and having empathy and seeing things from lots of perspectives that we often project how we think other people are seeing us. And I see this showing up for me a lot, the negative messages about how I show up in the world, and they're very subtle.
I'm on it. Sorry, I missed that. Could you say it again, please?
I turned the ringer on my phone off, and I don't know what I said, but SIRI heard
That
me.
may be beyond my abilities at the moment.
I guess I need to put my phone in airplane mode when I record. So I've totally lost my train of thought because that was incredibly unexpected. So I can see these very subtle ways where I imagine how other people are responding to me. I mean, it's happening at home that I'm making some changes, and they're not changes that people in my house are in alignment with or that they agree with. And so I know that when I do these things, like I imagine how they're perceiving it, and that really hurts me. I think it's a great skill that we have. There are times when it's really helpful, but I really want to see my life, my responses from my lens, because I make really great choices for me. And if other people have a response or reaction to it, I want to let that be their response or reaction. And another way I saw this show up is I was having some conflict is a strong word with someone. And again, via Marco Polo, which I don't get any money from, they responded, and I was kind of bracing for what I thought they were going to say. And I thought, is there anything that I said or did that I feel uncomfortable with? Like, no, this is what my truth is. And so if they have a response or reaction, I want to let that be their reaction. And so I think that it's a very subtle way that we kind of oppress ourselves by anticipating or imagining how others might respond. And I like the decisions that I make. I don't make perfect choices all the time. If I make a mistake, I'll own it. But I really want to start living a bolder, brighter life through the lens of how I see myself, how I show up in the world, less apologetically. And that's really what I'm going to focus on for this next year. So that's what my commitment is for the year. So what is it that you're working on? I would love to hear from you. There are a couple of projects that I'm thinking about starting. So nope, no guarantees. If you want to email me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com, if you want to join the closed Facebook group that we have called Unapologetically Sensitive, if you'd rather post on the open page, Unapologetically Sensitive, I would love to hear what is it that you want more of in the new year? What is it that you want less of? And I'm also thinking about doing a video series for people who want to share about the trait of being an HSP with a partner, a friend, a boss, an employee that's not an HSP. So I'm really curious to start gathering information of what is it that you would want them to know? What is the lens that you're looking through? Hopefully my goal for this next year is to get a newsletter together. And I just created a video it's a short 10-minute video that you can show your partner if you want to, I'm stumbling over my words. I just created a short video that if you have a partner or a friend that you want them to know about the trait, you're not sure how to talk about it, but I want to create some content that's going to be valuable for you. All right. So as we're going into the end of the year, what's working, what's not working? Can you find some time for yourself? I really would encourage you to, at the end of the day, think of 3 things every day that you've done that you feel good about. Not the outcome, but the process. So if you took time for yourself to have a cup of tea, if you took time to do something. Now, sometimes things don't turn out the way that we want, which is why it's not about the outcome, that sometimes we sit down to watch a movie and we can't get the movie up and going, and then we feel like it was a failure, but it's about the process. 3 things every day that you did, or we go to set a boundary and the person doesn't appreciate the boundary, or we feel guilty after setting the boundary. The goal was to set a boundary. That's why we focus on process. So I would really encourage you to, at the end of the day, to think of 3 things that you've done that you feel really good about, that you're proud of, because there's so many ways that we show up for ourselves, but because we have such strong emotional responses or things don't always go the way that we want, we often allow that to overshadow the fact that we did set a boundary, or we did take care of ourselves, or we had a cup of tea, or we had a difficult conversation, or we spent time and played, but then maybe we were late to something, and so it negates what we've done. I think that's it. This is a lot of talking. I hope you have a peaceful week. I hope if you're not having the peace that you want, that you can be okay with whatever's going on. You can find some love and compassion. You can find little pockets of comfort. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being a listener, for all the support that you give me. I really appreciate it. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.